Today I want to deal with a topic that is very dear to my heart, a question that I believe is very, very important. Over the last few weeks and months, I have had several different people come to me asking me the question of who wrote the Bible. And I've had other people asking me sort of follow-up questions, sort of who wrote the Bible, how do we know we can trust the Bible, how did we get the Bible, it was written 2,000 years ago, how do we know that the Bible we have today is accurate? Those are all very good questions, and we're going to answer all of those questions. And so the first question that we have to answer is who wrote the Bible? And it's a very good question to ask. I could give you a really simple answer like God. God wrote the Bible, and that's all you need to know. But if you're watching this video or doing any sort of topic, any sort of research on the topic, chances are you want something a little bit more in depth than God. And so I will do that. I'm going to give you some information, some data, historical evidence as to who wrote the Bible and how we know it was written by these people. First, I don't want to devalue though the fact that many people believe that the Bible is God's inspired word. There are many people all around planet Earth that believe that God wrote the Bible through man, and that the Bible is His words, and I'm included in that category. But even if you don't agree that the Bible was inspired by God, that's fine. The evidence is still very compelling, and I will prove the evidence, both using religious and secular sources. The Bible was written in two different sections. There's the Old Testament, and then there's the New Testament. The Old Testament was written before Jesus, the New Testament written after Jesus. The Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew. A little bit of it was written in some language, there's a derivative of Hebrew called Aramaic. The bulk of the New Testament was written in Greek. Greek was the business or trade language of its day. Very much like English is today. I've traveled all over the world. Most business and trade and commerce done around the world today is done in English. It's not the language that most people speak on planet Earth. That title belongs to Mandarin Chinese. But English is the language. If you're going to write a training manual or do any business and you want to permeate as many cultures as possible, you will absolutely do it in English. And so Greek was that in the Roman Empire during the 1st century, and that's the culture in which the New Testament is being written, and so it makes sense to be written in Greek. The New Testament is made up of 27 books, and so the New Testament is 27 books that really break up in two categories. There's epistles, and then there's what I call sort of testimonials or first-hand accounts. Epistles are letters written from someone aimed to teach or to address a particular issue. The most common epistle writer of the New Testament is a guy named Paul. We call these the Pauline epistles. Any epistle written by a guy named Paul, by the guy Paul the Apostle. Paul was Saul of Tarsus. He actually was a huge opponent of the church. He killed Christians, imprisoned them, tortured them, gave other people the license to kill and to torture, murder. But one day he's on the Damascus Road, and as he's traveling, he has an experience. We'll talk more about that experience at a later time, at a later date. But he has an experience that changes his life forever. And he changes his name from Saul of Tarsus to Paul. And he begins traveling all around the Roman Empire to different cities, preaching the gospel, telling people the Old Testament, or these people in the Old Testament writes about how God deals with the nation of Israel and how God promised that through the nation of Israel He would bring a Messiah. Then he talks about how the Messiah had come. His name is Jesus Christ, born of a virgin birth, lived a perfect life, did incredible miracles, died on the cross to pay the penalty for your sin and my sin, and then He resurrected from the dead. This is the gospel. This is the message that Paul preached. And he preached in all different cities. And he would stay in a city. Some cities he stayed in for just a few months and few weeks. Some he stayed much longer. In Ephesus he stayed 2.5 to 3 years. In Corinth we know he stayed for well over a year. And so what he would do is he would stay in these cities, he would preach, and then he'd leave to go to a different town and do the same thing. But often when he was in these other towns, he would write letters to the people he had left. Sometimes just reiterating what he had taught them. Sometimes it was just an encouragement to just keep going. Other times he would sort of address issues. He would get a message. Like in Corinth, he actually got a message from Corinth. There were some problems going on in the church. So he actually writes a letter to combat those issues and to teach them and instruct them how to deal with these problems that were going on. And that letter we have is 1 Corinthians. We call it 1 Corinthians. And so these are epistles. The second type of letter written throughout the New Testament, or second type of book, is what I call testimonials or first-hand accounts. This would be comparable to, let's say I saw a car accident or I was a witness of a crime. Someone would come to me and say, "Hey, what happened? Give us your first-hand knowledge of what took place." And that's a testimonial. That's what much of the New Testament is. It's simply one man's first-hand account of what took place and why he believes that to be the truth. And so we have epistles and we have sort of first-hand accounts, and even in the epistles we have multiple times some of the writers of the epistles stop to sort of reflect on some first-hand knowledge they might have. And so we have, and Paul wasn't the only guy that wrote epistles. James, who's the brother of Jesus, wrote an epistle. Peter, John, many guys wrote epistles. And so we have some great epistles. These are 27 books that make up the New Testament. Of those 27 books, when we say who wrote them, we know for sure of 26 of the 27 books. The vast majority of historians and theologians are simply someone who studies the Bible and has a lot of Bible information, a lot of Bible knowledge. Most theologians have PhDs and doctorates in different biblical topics. Many of them have multiple PhDs. And so most theologians, the vast majority of them, will agree on the authenticity and authorship of 26 of the 27 books of the New Testament. The one sort of standout is the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews was written by someone, we're not sure, 100% sure who it was, to a group of Jewish Christians during the first century. And so that is the question mark. That's one book. But 26 of the 27 we know, and there is strong historical evidence, both from religious and secular sources, as to how we know those books were written. What we'll do is this. In this video series, we're going to go book by book, all 27 books of the New Testament, and then we'll go back and do the Old Testament. We're going to do all 27 books of the New Testament. We're going to go book by book, starting with the book of Matthew, all the way through the book of Revelation. And what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you book by book why, who wrote each book, and how we know for sure who wrote each book. I'll tell you one caveat. There is some portion of theologians and historians that do not agree on the authorship and authenticity of some of the books of the New Testament. And I will address those when I get to each book. Some of the books are in question as to who wrote them. Some people don't believe that all of the 13 Pauline epistles were written by Paul. And so I'll explain to you why they believe that, and I'll show you that not only those guys in the minority, but their evidence is relatively weak in comparison to the evidence on the other side. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say we can know beyond a shadow of a doubt 100% sure who wrote each book of the Bible. But I could tell you that with 24 of the 27 books of the New Testament, I can tell you with like 98%, maybe 99% accuracy or confidence that we know who wrote it. One of them we're not really sure. Two of them we're 100% sure. Two of books of the Bible. Every secular historian, archaeologist, theologian, no matter where you stand, agrees that the book of Galatians and the book of 1 Corinthians were written by Paul in the first century. And we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are authentic. And the funny thing is that the book of 1 Corinthians and Galatians actually give us strong evidence to many of the other books in the New Testament. And so what we'll do is we'll examine that. So we're going to go book by book, explain who wrote each one and how we know that the book was written. And my goal by the end of this is that you will be confident in the authenticity and the authorship of the New Testament.